Okay, let's get started if we could. Good morning. I want to begin with a few announcements today. The first one is in the mix-up involving the microphone on Tuesday. I didn't get to introduce Emily, our lead TA. This is Emily Escobar, and she is not only a fantastic person, but she will be a great TA for you. And I hope you have the opportunity to interact with her extensively over the course of the quarter. So this is our second meeting, and by this time in the course, I hope you are now connecting up with all the resources that are available to you, that you have a copy of the syllabus, that you're starting to locate, obviously, a textbook, that you are able to find the podcasts online, that you are able to find the video clips online, and so forth. So by this time in the class, one of the key issues for you is to make sure you have access to all of the things that I introduced in class on Tuesday. If that's not the case, check the syllabus, double check the syllabus, or a classmate, or Emily or I. I've received a couple emails, and I'm trying to facilitate that for all of you. So let me know if there are any difficulties getting to the material that we've prepared for you. Second announcement I want to make is that I know a number of you have emailed me about the honor sections, which will begin next Wednesday, and there will be 3 or possibly 4 of those. The issue right now is that I've received your emails, and I appreciate your sending those to me. Thank you. I'm now working with the department to get the PTE numbers, and I'm going to assign you all to sections based on what you've told me about your availability, and I will hope to get back to you by ideally the end of tomorrow. There's just some internal departmental logistics that I have to go through. I'm not anticipating any problems. I think it'll all work out. If there is and I know what you're aiming to do is the same thing I'm aiming to do, which is lock down a schedule. If there have been any changes in your schedule that sort of shift you from preferring one section to another or make one section impossible for you to attend, let me know that, and I'll try to build that into my calculations as much as possible. I know you want to firm up your schedule, and I want to try to do that as quickly as I possibly can. But if there have been changes to the schedule that you've originally sent me for a section, just let me know, and I'll do my absolute best to accommodate that. Question?
How long are the sections?
The sections are 50 minutes long, so they will be from the hour till 10 minutes before the hour. Other logistical sorts of questions about the book, about podcasts, about video? Yes?
For the honor section, do we email you to show interest?
If you haven't already emailed me, you can email me to express interest. Absolutely. It's starting to get a little tight, but I'm going to do everything I can to accommodate as many people as possible in those sections. Even if I can pull it off, adding another section to meet with you guys, because I know it's, as much as I love this opportunity to talk to you, I also enjoy the 10, 12, 15 students as well. So I'm going to try to accommodate as many of you as possible. There are room issues and PTE issues, but I'll try to iron those out in the background and get back to you, as I said, by the end of tomorrow. It might be in the weekend, though, so do keep track of your emails as we go along. Also, with regard to getting connected to course materials, I hope you've all been able to find the lecture slides that I post. They're almost all posted out for what you need until the midterm. I'll get the last couple days up before too long. More germane to what's happening right now is that I put up 2 handouts that I'd like you to look over in anticipation of class on Tuesday. And they are notes that will really help you navigate a video that I'm going to show you on Tuesday, okay? If you don't get to those, it's not catastrophic. You'll be able to follow along just fine. But if you do get to them and you're able to take even 5 minutes to look over each of the 2 handouts, the video clip will have a little bit more value to you. So we're going to watch a clip of a couple, basically a case study of a very interesting couple, and look at the video through theoretical lenses. That's what we'll do on Tuesday. Question?
The YouTube clips are posted week by week?
The YouTube clips are posted on the UCLA Relationship Institute channel on YouTube. And then toward the bottom of that page, my very first UCLA Relationship Institute page, there is a playlist with 13 video clips in it. And it shouldn't be too hard to find. I think it's clips with couples and experts, something like that. Have any of you been able to find those? Is that you finding those? Okay. So that's just on YouTube. And those, again, they correspond one per chapter. And it shouldn't be too hard to get the title of the video to connect up with the title of the lecture. Question over here? Yeah.
Yeah, this is something separate, but are the honors sections available other quarters or just this quarter?
Are the honors sections available other quarters? It turns out that in order to offer an honors section, you have to have this class, and then you offer the sections on top of that. Dr. Carney is teaching the class in the spring, and he will also have honors sections, and I think you need to be enrolled in his main class to participate in the section. I think that's how it goes. Okay, other logistical questions as we're getting settled into the quarter? Okay, great. The key thing is that you start to get into the rhythm of the class, that you really have access to the materials. And if you don't, let us know, and we'll do everything we can to get you connected and tied in. Okay. So when we left the discussion on Tuesday, I had covered a number of points. I've summarized them here. We talked about why relationships are so important. I distinguished between intrinsic reasons why relationships matter and extrinsic reasons. Talked a little bit about the core experience of close relationships and how they can really elevate us and bring us up to an amazing level of achievement, amazing emotional experiences, things that are in many ways unique to dyadic intimate relationships. We talked about definitional criteria, and I also asked you to entertain this idea that when we look at any couple, when we consider any couple, that we naturally start to ask different kinds of questions. And in general, when we think about relationships, what I find compelling is this idea that relationships are so prevalent in our lifetimes. We will spend substantial portions of our time, not all of our time, in relationships, but by the time you get to be 65 years old, census data suggest that 85 to 95% of you will have been in a long-term committed partnership and may still be in a long-term committed partnership. So relationships are common. They're powerful experiences in our lives. They help us to understand who we are and who we are not. They enable us, they provide us with a platform of doing that for somebody else. We almost always willingly participate in our relationships. It's something that we pursue. We usually don't have to think twice about it. And that's interesting, but conversely, we also know there's difficulties that come up with relationships, right? There are struggles, there are challenges, there are issues that arise that make all of that engagement and that desire and that willingness to be in a relationship complex. It's complicated, right? And in this class, we want to try to understand that complexity. We want to address this critical question of how is it that we enter relationships in certain ways, that they develop in certain ways, and that we end up having more or less fulfilling experiences as we go along. And in this class, I want to give you some real insights into how that happens. We don't have perfect answers to these questions, but we have some really good working understandings of how relationships work and how they fail to work. And in some ways, these are not always obvious or intuitive, the answers that I'll be sharing with you. But as we get to that point, as we ask that critical question, we run into some problems. And one of the problems is there are diverse opinions, reasonable, good, legitimate opinions that are very different about why relationships work and why they don't work. And we have to develop that idea a little bit, right? So we have to sort out between different explanations, some of which may be better, some explanations may be better than other explanations, and we have to have something more than opinions, right? We have to have something more than just subjectivity in our own experience, as valuable as that might be, but we want to transcend that and hope that we can achieve something that resembles a principle or a rough idea, not just what happens in my relationship or in other relationships, but how relationships in their totality tend to work, right? So we need to start to sort out among competing explanations. And here are some of the questions that we think about, questions you probably think about. Are men and women mostly similar or mostly different? You can make a case for either one of those perspectives. Is it better to resolve and hash out your conflicts, or is it better to let them sort of ride out? Reasonable positions to take, right? Both of them. If people are having trouble in their relationship, let's say it's a committed partnership, let's even go one step further, it's a committed partnership where there's children on board, there are kids involved. Should those two people, those parents, stay together? Or should they split up if they're really experiencing problems? So let's take one of these. Let's take the first one. What do you think? Men and women, mostly similar, mostly different? What do you think? Mostly different? Say more. Say more about that.
I like the way women and men are raised to think, the way we speak, the way they're supposed to act. They're just different.
Okay. So the way, and what's your name again?
Maya.
Mai. Mai says that on the basis of the way people are socialized, they think differently, they act differently, they have different emotional experiences. And so if they enter into relationships, either with a same-sex partner or another sex partner, that's going to matter. Other thoughts about men and women? Fundamentally different, fundamentally similar. What do you think? Yeah.
I think they're fundamentally the same, but we have different aptitudes.
Oops.
But essentially, we both want the same thing.
Okay, so similar in terms of what they're aiming for, what they're trying to achieve, maybe different in their aptitudes, their propensities for how they go about achieving that. Okay, other thoughts? Men and women, fundamentally different, fundamentally the same. Yeah.
I think they're mostly similar naturally, but society expects different things from us. Maybe men shouldn't share so much and be so emotional, and women are expected to be allowed to be more emotional, things like that.
So, and tell me your name? Olivia. Olivia suggests that there are basic similarities, even I think you used the word natural similarities, and yet with regard to how men and women are socialized, much like Mai was saying, their differences emerge. So men and women are expected to do different things, they have different roles, they have different societal expectations for what they are and are not able to do, and as a result of those expectations, they end up being kind of different. Other thoughts about men and women? Yeah.
I think sometimes it has to do with like the era and time. So like right now, it's kind of a little more culturally appropriate because we're more similar. But like a while ago, maybe in the 50s, like there were more inherent differences that were more appropriate.
So maybe, and your name?
Ariella.
Ariella suggests that maybe it's what we might call a time-bound answer to the question. Depends on the times that we're in. That in contemporary times, maybe some of the natural societal constraints that have been operating, like Olivia was saying, maybe they're not as maybe they're more relaxed now than they were in our parents' or our grandparents' generation. So a lot of what we're thinking about are social expectations, how those social norms and expectations change over time, and that might affect whether men and women are fundamentally different in their relationships. it's possible to measure the things that we're talking about. It's possible to collect evidence, to collect data, and to actually find out how men and women are similar and different. And in our class a week from today, when we talk about, when we address the issues in Chapter 4, we're going to really dive into answering that question. And this is a general thing that I want you to be able to achieve in this class, which is if someone raises an issue with you 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and I want you to have a more sophisticated understanding than what the ordinary person on the street might have about men and women. Because if you read not too deeply into the popular literature on men and women, it sort of devolves pretty quickly into which one is better, right? It's really more complicated, more subtle, and more interesting than that. And what I want you to do, and what we'll talk about especially next Thursday, is understand those subtleties. It turns out that there's truth to both of the positions that you've been outlining. On one hand, when we really measure characteristics of men and women on a specific dimension, we see surprisingly small differences. Surprisingly small differences. And it's consistent with the idea that in contemporary times, men and women are affectively, emotionally, fairly similar creatures. Men and women want closeness, they want connection. They may go about achieving that in different ways. So we see small differences, but they add up to suggest that they're very profound differences. And we'll dig into those a week from today. So the more general point that I'm raising here is that there are legitimate points of disagreement and that we need research to sort out among those points of view. And so what we need to do is collect good information to sort out among these different options. So all of Chapter 2, as you dig into Chapter 2, all of Chapter 2 is about how do we do that? How do we collect information on these complex, dynamic, somewhat intangible aspects of intimate relationships so that we can develop trustworthy information that allows us to have reasoned and legitimate perspectives on which option is more likely to be accurate and even actionable. So we have to think about who we can trust. And when we think about collecting data, again, and I mentioned this in class on Tuesday, and this is one of the things that first brought me into this field, was this unmistakable idea that as I looked at my parents when I was growing up, as I looked at my friends' parents, as I started living my own life through high school and into college, I saw the power of relationships on people. And at the same time, I was really interested in how you can apply the rigor of scientific methods to something that seems so important but so ineffable, so difficult to grasp. And I love that friction. I love that challenge. I love thinking about how do we collect data on things that are so difficult to understand. And we should think a little bit about what makes relationships somewhat difficult to penetrate from a scientific standpoint. Okay? One thing, by the way, here's one thing that makes relationships difficult to study. There are certain experiments that we're pretty much not allowed to conduct. There's some experiments that we can do. For example, I have done experiments where I randomly assign couples to different sorts of educational programs and see which ones affect their relationships over the next 3 years. We'll talk about that after the midterm. There are lots of other experiments that we're not able to conduct. Experimentation is one of the central tools that any scientist wants to be able to have access to. When we're doing research on relationships, guess what? I cannot randomly assign this person who has a certain type of personality with that person over there. I'm just not allowed to do that. I can't do an experiment where I say, well, let's randomly assign people on the basis of their personality characteristics and then see which ones really matter over time. That is not a study I'm going to be allowed to do. So with that as sort of a general backdrop, what I am and unable, what I cannot manipulate, here's another study I can't do. I would like to call established married couples in their homes randomly, ask to speak to the man of the house, but use a female voice and hope to speak to the wife and speak in the most sexiest possible way and say, "Is Jerry there tonight?" I can't do that to study, who's going to respond to inquiries about infidelity. Like, those are studies I can't do. So we have some difficulties. We have a sort of an uphill challenge when we're trying to study relationships. Relationships are dyadic. In order to understand relationships well, we really want information from both people, either from their own perspectives, filling out a questionnaire, giving us biological data, something. And we also want something about how they're interacting together. Remember in our class on Tuesday, we talked about this idea of interdependence as a kind of a critical ingredient and a defining feature of relationships. I affect you, you affect me, we do it in lots of different ways, and it's powerful and it's meaningful, right? So we want to be able to bring that into the room when we study it. Relationships are also private, right? So part of what we like about our relationships is that it's between me and another person, and there are moments in my relationship that I might not want to share with anybody else except my relationship partner, right? So we have to be very careful about the kinds of questions we ask. Relationships are invisible. So that interdependence that we talked about, that's a real phenomenon, right? When my wife sends me a text, when she calls me, I respond. But there's something very difficult to see about our relationships. You can see two people walking down the sidewalk, and maybe you don't really know if they're complete strangers or if they've been in a relationship for 15 years, right? There's invisibilities to our relationship that we have to penetrate and see and try to ask meaningful questions about. Relationships are also dynamic. In fact, that's part of what makes them so fascinating, is that they change over time. Often people don't realize how much their own relationships are changing over time, and they fail to catch up with the changes that are happening. Right? They respond to their partner as though their partner were the person that they first started seeing 10 years ago, rather than acknowledging that their partner may have changed in important ways, and maybe you haven't caught up to that. So relationships are dynamic. They change over time. From a research standpoint, what that means is you can't just study them at one slice in time. Right? You have to study them repeatedly. You have to get multiple waves of data. Relationships are emotional. There's affect involved. You don't want to just study unemotional characteristics of relationships. What's interesting in relationships is there's a pull, there's a tug, there's joy, there's emotion, there's anger, there's frustration, there's sadness. And it's a theoretical assertion, but still, those are the kinds of things we want to study. How do you study that? Do you provoke those sorts of emotions in the lab? Actually, we kind of do that. We ask people to argue in the lab. We ask people to talk about the biggest problem in their relationship and see how they deal with that. We have ways of doing that, but it probably only scratches the surface of the emotional richness that exists in our intimate bonds. Another reason that studying relationships is difficult is because there's complexity. There's lots of different layers. And at the end of our class on Tuesday, I listed a number of factors that come into play in relationships. How they started, the gender characteristics of the partner, whether it's 1950 or 2015, how much stress people are under, how much money they're making right now, whether there has been sort of an unstated agreement in the relationship that if I move with you to Florida and that's the job you're going to take right after we graduate, that maybe I get the choice over the next move we make in the relationship, even though we've never really talked about that, right? There's all kinds of subtleties and nuances and complexities in our relationship that make them difficult to understand. There's many potential things that we have to measure. So what do we do? Well, as I've already mentioned, what we're trying to do is move from impressions and opinions to something that represents a fact, or even better, a principle. How do relationships work? And there shouldn't be an unlimited set of principles. There should be a finite number of principles, a finite number of core ideas that we can latch on to and always refer back to, right? So we collect data, we collect information, and We try to make headway. We try to make progress as we maneuver through all of those complexities, right? We try to make smart decisions. And usually, if you hear about a research study, you might just take away like a little factoid, a little bit of knowledge, right? And what I want you to be able to do as you go through this course and as you go through subsequent stages of your life, and when you hear about a research study on the news or on the internet, or you seek out a research study, that you start to recognize that when you're collecting information, what you're doing is usually using what we think of as an instrument, a device, a way of collecting information from somebody. And I want to tell you about a number of those devices in today's lecture. You do that under specified conditions, right? You do that under conditions that make a difference. For example, if I brought you into my laboratory and I had both you and your partner sitting in front of me, and I said, so I'd like to get your opinions and your experiences on how much both of you have had sex with people outside of your relationship. Okay? I'm guessing that I'm not going to get an accurate answer from at least one of you. Okay? So there are conditions under which data are collected. And we all need to be able to appreciate those conditions. I do a lot of research in my laboratory. I videotape couples. I go into couples' homes and videotape them there, I mentioned. I did a study once here with colleagues in the anthropology department where not only did we go into their homes, we followed them for 8 hours a day for several days with a videographer. Now, if they went to the bathroom, we didn't follow them. If they went into the bedroom, we didn't follow them. If they said, leave us alone, we usually left them alone. But there are conditions that affect how you're going to interpret any study. Okay? And we learned a lot from that study. But we also learned that being exposed to the measurement process may change how you behave, right? Most of us would probably be on our best behavior if we were under some scientist's microscope, right? So we always have to understand the conditions under which data are collected. We also need to know who's the population. Who is the population that we're studying, right? And when are you studying them in the course of their relationship? If relationships change, well, it means that if I were to study your relationship in the very first few weeks of that relationship and ask you how your sex life was going, it might be very different from how it would be 2 or 3 years later, right? So there are populations and points within the career, the trajectory of your relationship that we have to know. So anytime you hear a research study, I want you to be able to say, okay, tell me more about that. Because I can't just absorb the little nugget of information that you're trying to convince me is true. I need to know who these people are, how many of them there are, how representative the sample is, for example, what instruments were used, and what were the conditions under which those data were collected. So let's talk a little bit about some of these tools. And now, and often I'll try to do this, if you've already read Chapter 2, you should start to see some subheadings that look familiar, right? So this is a big subheading in Chapter 2. Just like the intrinsic and extrinsic subheadings were fairly salient in Chapter 1. Okay, so what I try to do is parallel some of my lecture material, the stuff that I think is important that I really want you to take away. I try to parallel that. I try to structure that in parallel with what you're reading. So one of the first things you're going to read about, and one of our most widely used tools in psychology in general and in the study of relationships, is our self-report methods. Because there are private experiences that you have, in many ways, the easiest and most efficient way for me to get that information is just to ask you in a standardized format on a questionnaire. Okay? So these are very cheap. You've probably all done something like this online. They're pretty valuable. You can really get a wide range of information. You know, it's really limited only by the questions that you can think to ask. But when we think about that dyadic characteristic of our relationship, I can ask, I can ask this person, I can ask you about how's your relationship going? How are things going for you right now? How do you spend your time together? What do you think about your partner in these specific arenas of your relationship? And she would have a really good answer. Her partner would also have really good answers, but they may not match up. Okay? There's nothing about what's cool about relationships, which is the dyadic process, right? How we interact, how what you say changes how I think, how I feel, and then I say something back to you, and that changes how you think and feel, right? So questionnaires, even questionnaires about how you resolve conflict or how you support one another when the going gets tough, they are incomplete. They are really sort of diluted versions of the essence of what we think of is so cool in relationships, which is people talking to each other. And that's why I, for example, invest so much time and energy into collecting videotapes of people talking to each other. So, self-report methods, great in many arenas of life, many arenas of research about couples' lives, but not very good at capturing that dynamic back and forth. Okay? Here's an example of data collected with self-report methods. That's the couple on the left that I talked to you about on Tuesday. Remember that couple? Started off sort of in the middle range of relationship satisfaction, trended downward until she had the lowest possible satisfaction score. This is you didn't see this last time, but this was the estimated conception date of their child. This is the actual birth date of their child. And you can see that the husband was probably very much influenced by the fact that he was going to become a father for the first time in the study. Other couples go in other directions, right? So the variety here is extraordinary. My point is, it's really easy to collect this data. It's probably pretty informative. Someone on Tuesday mentioned that they seem to go together. Like there's kind of a correspondence. They're not perfect, but they seem to somehow be in sync with each other. And we would say, oh, that adds to the validity of the information. So self-report data seems to tell us something pretty interesting. It's just not everything we want to know. So here's another couple who filled out questionnaires. And by the way, each one of these points is a questionnaire. And this is the number of days into their marriage that it had been completed. So this couple started off with us in my lab on the 105th day of their marriage, their first marriage. And you can see this couple much happier at the start, and even went up, which is not so common. They had different reactions to the discovery that they're going to become parents. Then they were doing really well 700 days into the marriage. The baby arrived, and something happened. And then when the child had his or her, I'm not sure in this case, his or her first birthday, things got better, right? So you can see there's information here, but it leads us to say, but what's going on? What's really happening? Why did it get so much better? Yeah, question.
What do the yellow boxes mean?
The yellow boxes are the times in the, good question, last trimester of pregnancy. Child is 3 months old. Child is 9 months old.
So same there, it refers to
Same.
the child.
It's the last trimester, so last 3 months of the pregnancy, and then as best we can, we try to get people to fill it out. I think it's 3 months and then 9 months. I can't remember the exact dates.
It always refers to a child.
The last 2 points refer to the child's age, that's right. The other ones are all in 6 month sequence, so we try to hit people on a 6 month basis. So it reveals something, not everything. Here's a cool finding. Partners don't always agree on relationship events. If you give partners separate lists of common events in their relationship, like when was the last time you had a date? When was the last time you had sex? When was the last time you had a really nice meal together? When was the last time you did some chores together? When was the last time you had you went out with friends and family? If you and your partner filled out that list and you said, did that happen in the last week? And you match up those two answers, you match up your list, your yes or no list, with your partner's yes or no list, guess what? that trip to the department store, that wasn't a date. You thought that was a date? That was not a date. Okay? You thought that was sex? That wasn't sex. That was maybe that it got close, but it wasn't. It didn't match my definition, right? People define things differently, right? And part of what's interesting about relationships is that what my wife thinks of as a date, it's not a trip to the hardware store. Go figure, right? So partners are not always extracting. So a simple study, we could do it easily, like it's really a low-cost study, with self-report data. Partners don't always extract the same information from their lives as our lives stream by. Even if they do, oh yeah, I was there, I was at the hardware store with you. Guess what? That wasn't a date. But we stopped on the way home. Remember, we stopped and we went to Starbucks. It was like a date. We stood in line together. Sorry, that doesn't count. So even if they remember, yeah, I was there, I remember the event, but it wasn't what you're thinking, right? So what's the implication? Communication matters in relationships. Communication has significance and salience in our relationships because what we're trying to always do is make sure our realities match up, or at least that you understand my reality as I understand it, and I understand your reality. And so communication becomes this really interesting process of negotiating reality. All right, so that's one method that we use a lot. It's almost, but not entirely impossible to imagine a study that in some way didn't use a questionnaire. Another method that we use are called daily diaries. Have any of you ever been in a daily diary kind of study? Daily diary study involves a self-report method. So it's still a self-report method, but the unique feature of it is that I am asking you to fill out one brief questionnaire, often on a smartphone or on a website, once a day, maybe even several times a day. So I would, if I were in this study and I agreed to be in this study, I would get more or less randomly beeped. I would get a message on my phone and it would say, here's the questionnaire I'd like you to fill out. And you would say, are you with your partner right now? Yes or no? What time is it? Usually you can know that. Who else is present? And there's a drop-down menu and you can get that information. How are you feeling right now? I'm feeling pretty good. And then I would be able to fill out a number of other questions about what's happening right now in my life and with my relationship partner. But only in right now, in this moment, right? Sometimes this is called ecological momentary assessment. You don't need to know that term, but you'll see that as you run through different studies. So you ask subjects to report on one or more brief periods during a day for several days. So now you're trying to sample what's going on in people's lives. And what this does is it enables you to study interactions across many days in a relationship as people are perceiving them, right? So it wouldn't be just you who's getting this beep on your smartphone, but it would also be your partner. And they would also be filling it out, right? How stressful was work today? How stressful do you think it's going to be? How much time did you spend with your kids today? Well, you can both fill that out, and you can actually fill it out based on what your partner's thinking. So if I were in the study, I could tell you what my mood was at 4 o'clock when I got this text message. I could also try to project what I think my partner's mood is, right? And my partner could evaluate my mood. And I could see if there's correspondence between how my mood's going and how my partner is perceiving my mood, right? Still, it's self-report data, right? It's really cool because you get a density of data across a day and across several weeks. So you can do these studies for as long as people are willing to keep responding to your messages on their smartphone, right? People do these for 40 days at a time, for example. And you can learn a lot about the ebb and flow of daily life and relationships, but you're still not getting direct access to couples' interactions. There are now new studies that are coming out that where you would fill out this on your phone, and then if it said you were in the same place as your partner, it would then start making an audio recording on your phone, right? So it's possible that we'll eventually get to that place where it triggers interactional data, but still it's really self-report data. So here is a cool study, cool finding, that support doesn't always have to be visible for it to be helpful. So lots of times when we think about supporting people in a relationship, you say, wow, I feel kind of stressed, I've got a lot of stuff going on, let me help you, let me talk with you, let me do a chore for you that you would ordinarily have to do yourself, but I'll sort of take that off your shoulders. I'll do that for you, right? So when we think about support, we think about, how you doing? Is that going well for you? Is there something I can do to help you? What this study showed, using diary data, is that the best kind of support may be really under the radar. It may be really subtle. And let me tell you just a little bit about how the authors of this study, in this case, a colleague of mine, Niall Bolger, who you'll see in some of the videotapes, the video clips on the YouTube channel. Niall Bolger did this study with his colleagues. He's at Columbia University right now. So what he did is he collected daily diary data from couples in the month 30 days before one of the members of the couple was going to take the bar exam. Bar exam, as many of you probably know, the big exam you need to be a practicing attorney so that you can start to make serious amounts of cash. Okay? So it matters. It's a significant and important event in couples' lives, and they're both invested in making sure this one person is really able to study and succeed on the exam. In this case, the examinee, the person taking the exam, reports on their own distress and what their partner did to help them. So every day, if I were the person taking the exam, I would say I would report on how anxious and upset I am, and I would also report on the things that my partner did to help me. Okay? If you were my partner and you weren't taking the bar exam, you would report on the things that you did to help me. Okay? So the partner reports on the providing support. So I would give you questions in this diary study about the things that you did to help me. Today, these are all the things I did. Did you do this? Yes. Did you do that? No. Did you do the laundry? No. Did you prepare a meal? No. Etc. Right? Supported partners feel less distress. People, as you might expect, the more stuff you do for me, the less anxious I feel. But guess what? If I don't notice the support, you say, oh, I went out and did the grocery shopping, and I don't notice it, that's even better. Invisible support is really potent. That's what the term is now, invisible support. And the idea is that if I'm taking the exam, and I notice that you've provided me with support, then I sort of feel guilty. I sort of feel like I'm in debt to you. I sort of feel weak instead of strong. Oh, I'm so incapacitated right now that my partner has to provide me with meals, right? That's how weak I am at this moment, right? And you might think that if I were to notice the things that you were doing for me, that I would feel indebted to you, right? So the implication is that obvious support attempts convey two messages inadvertently. One is, you're kind of weak. You can't even wash your own clothes. And the other one is, you might owe me for the support that I just provided you, so that once this exam is over, oh, this is totally going to turn the other way around, and you are going to be my slave. So the idea, which we never really would have been able to understand had we not used a diary study, is that selflessness can be very powerful. Just doing something for somebody else who is in a state of need, without calling attention to yourself, without saying, hey, I did the laundry today, I did your laundry and folded your socks. Without doing that, you are actually providing a very high degree of support. Okay? We wouldn't have really known that without diary data. Yeah, question?
Couldn't it also be the opposite? Let's say I'm
I mean, I'm not noticing. He is. So I'm upset and thinking, oh, why isn't he not helping me? Because I need help right now. Even though I don't think that's a sign of a weakness, that's like, I need help.
So let me make sure I understand that. So if you are taking the exam and you are reporting that your partner isn't helping you,
I'm not noticing. Right?
you're not noticing. And is it because they did it or because they failed to do it?
No, they did it.
They did something, so your partner's helping you, but you didn't notice it.
I didn't notice it. So I'm feeling upset that he's not helping me.
So the upsetness, your upsetness might somehow be blinding you to the support that they are providing. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
It's possible. Yeah, that could be, I think that's not independent of this. It's actually a possible explanation for why that comes about, is that I'm so caught up in my own emotions that I really can't see around them to value the support that you are providing me. And an implication of that, interestingly enough, is that part of what good support is a recognition of the emotional state of the person you're trying to support, right? Oh, I'm not being appreciated here. Is it because I'm simply not being appreciated as a human being? Or is it because my partner's got other things going on, right? And so you might cut them some slack because you say, oh, my partner's got a lot on their plate and I don't need to get credit for the support that I'm providing. So that's the diary method, and the important idea is as you go through the book, you're going to see these different methods. You're going to see studies using these different tools. And I want you to be able to criticize them and understand them and see what they do and don't allow us to do. A third method that we use a fair amount, and that technology has certainly enabled over the past decade, the availability of very cheap video cameras, is the ability to conduct systematic observations of couples as they're interacting. This can go in one of two directions. One direction is studying people as much as possible in their natural environment. So they're just doing whatever they ordinarily do. That turns out to be very time-consuming. It's not uninteresting, but it tends to not reveal that much information. Mostly because as people are in their daily lives, they're just doing a lot of chores and a lot of stuff, okay? So systematic observation can involve just tracking people, and I mentioned a few moments ago a study that I've done. That study showed that people spend surprisingly little time in conversation with their partners, believe it or not, in really significant conversations, especially when they have kids. That sort of pulls out a lot of the just regular relationship conversations that people have. But the other kind of systematic observation that we can conduct involves asking people to do something. So putting people into a room together and saying, we would like you to have this kind of conversation. We would like you to, here's one thing that we're doing, and this is one of the couples from one of my studies back in, they were newlyweds in 1993. They're still married. They gave me permission to use their picture, in fact, and I think they have 2 or 3 children. And they were in my laboratory, and it doesn't look like it, but they're facing each other, and there's a camera over each of their shoulders. And so when you look at the combined image, you see both of their faces, right? So in this case, I'm not sure exactly what this moment was. There's a little timer on the bottom. We usually do this for 10 or 15 minutes. We say, we would like you to each identify a difference of opinion that you have in your relationship, something that you really disagree about, and that maybe you've had a disagreement recently about. And people are pretty able to identify things that they talk about, and the one person will be able to identify one thing, and the other person we ask them to identify a separate topic. And then we say, okay, we're going to have 2 conversations, 10 minutes each, in which you raise this beef that you have, this gripe, this complaint that you have about your relationship, this issue that isn't working out. And we're going to give you 10 minutes, and we're going to leave the room, so go ahead and have that conversation. And then we'd have that conversation, then they would reverse roles, and then the other person would talk about the problem that they want to talk about. And these conversations go in lots of different directions. People immediately get the idea, like it's not complicated. People also surprisingly forget the cameras pretty quickly. When you're in a room with your partner and your partner says, you know, you're kind of a slob, it's really hard to say, honey, thanks for that feedback. I will try to become a better, more respectful, neater partner every possible moment in our lives. That's not the way those conversations go. Here's how those conversations go. I know because I've seen on the order of 3,000 of them. They go like this. I'm a slob. What do you mean you're a slob? The dishes are always in the sink and they're never cleaned on time. And the other person says, well, hang on a minute. We're not talking about your problem. We're talking about my problem. And my problem is, I think you're a slob, and I think you're not picking up your clothes. And off they go, right? So I'm not saying that these are the exact same conversations that people ordinarily would have. I don't think that's the case. But they do capture really valid information. They finally get past that problem that the self-report studies were creating for us, right? They didn't get the gist, the essence of the conversations. Diary data is also, it's just you talking about an argument you might have. Now we're looking at the argument, okay? So what we do is we collect all of these videotapes. We then train observers to code very specific things in these conversations. And for example, we have large dictionaries of code, what we call codes. And so, for example, I have one dictionary that is all about the emotions that people express. Anger and contempt and sadness and anxiety and happiness and humor. And we can code these things and we can do it reliably. And then we look at the patterning of these communication behaviors and we try to understand which ones of them tend to do the best job predicting relationship satisfaction as a way of saying, well, if we did want to help couples have better communication, what would we help them do? Right? That's the idea. So we're videotaping couples. It might be a little bit artificial. People don't tend to have these conversations. It's fairly expensive, mostly because you have to send people into people's homes or you have to bring them to your laboratory. And the coding process itself is fairly time-consuming. So learning how to code these tapes takes a lot of time, and actually doing it takes a lot of time. You also need somebody to check on the coding process. That takes a lot of time. So, but still, it's really, really interesting. And as we go through the class, I'll show you some interactions of couples. Not everybody gives permission to show their videotapes of their private conversations in front of groups of undergraduates, so it's difficult to get permission for that. But here's the cool finding that we get from videotape data. A bunch of newlyweds, 172 newlyweds in this study, all of them right at the beginning of their marriage, came to my lab, we videotaped them. And the cool finding that we discovered was positive emotion. Positive emotion can neutralize a lot of negative communication. Positive emotion in relationships, which tends to decline naturally with the passing of time in relationships, actually exerts a very powerful role in offsetting any toxic or harmful effects that might be associated with expressions of anger and contempt. Okay? So if we videotape newlyweds resolving problems, and we separately label the verbal skills and the specific emotions in each speaking turn, so we can code how much you agree with your partner, we can code how much you disagree with your partner, we can code how much you elaborate on what your partner says, we can code how much you defend yourself after your partner says something to you, right? We can code a lot of different things that we naturally say in conversation, and then you can follow couples over time. You can look at the rate at which their relationship deteriorates, changes in satisfaction over the next 4 years or so. In this case, it was 4 years, right? And so what we discover is that if you have a certain amount of negativity, right? Let's just say you have, in a 10-minute conversation, it would not be at all unusual to see, let's say, 8 expressions of something unpleasant disagreeing or being a little angry. And this isn't like standing up shouting angry. This is, what do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about. I think you're full of crap. Like, this just isn't the way it happens, right? We'll see somewhere between 4 and 8 of those in most couples. Happy couples disagree all the time, okay? It's just part of our relationships. Two people naturally are going to see the world in different ways, especially if you put them in a lab and say, disagree about something, right? It makes it even more likely. So let's imagine you have an average couple. Let's say it's 5 expressions of negativity. If those 5 expressions of negativity are matched with 0 expressions of humor and interest and affection, that couple's in trouble. Okay? If you match those same 5 instances of negativity with 3 or even 4 instances of humor, interest, and affection, all of that negativity doesn't matter, right? So negativity is potent in our relationships until we embed that alongside a lot of positive emotion, like humor, like interest, like affection. So I've seen people say things like, wow, I really disagree with you. I totally disagree with you on this, but I am so happy that I am disagreeing with you more than anyone else on this planet. I am so happy to have this disagreement with you. And all of a sudden you go, oh my God, that's the best thing in the world, right? So if you can have disagreements that, I mean, it's, in one respect, it's pretty obvious, right? But if you can have respectful disagreements where you say, Jesus, I am a bit of a slob now that you mention it. I totally cop to that, right? If you can really sort of find the humor and find the affection and mobilize positive emotion when you're being attacked, you really have the workings of a good relationship. So this is just a slice, a little snippet of what an observational piece of data helps us to understand. Difficult to see with self-report data, difficult to see with diary data. Okay, let's talk a little bit about physiology and hormones. Turns out that when we think about relationships, we're not only interested in this question of what makes them satisfying and fulfilling, which I think is our key question, our guiding question, but one of the reasons we care about that question is for the extrinsic reasons that I mentioned in class on Tuesday. Relationships are good for us. When they're going well, they really promote our physical health, our mental health. They really sort of keep us on track. Now, there are other ways of doing it. People can manage their lives as individuals really well. I'm not saying that that's not the case. But statistically, there's a tendency for our relationships, to being in a relationship and to being in a warm, nurturing, compassionate relationship, that has implications for our physical well-being. And people want to know how that happens. How do we connect this conversation that we're having right now, or the lives that I'm leading with my partner, and the structure of that, and what you enable me to do and what I enable you to do? How do we connect that with the physiology going on inside my body that then might promote me living a longer, healthier, disease-free life? Or at least being able to recover more quickly from disease, right? How does that happen? That's really interesting that there's an interpersonal process that has psychological dimensions to it, and somehow something inside my body is changing that enables me to be healthier, okay? It's an important thing to understand. And we now have procedures that allow us to sample a wide range of physiological and biological processes. Not too long ago, it was difficult to imagine that I could assess something about your nervous system, something about your biology, something about your physiology, and I could do that fairly cheaply. We can measure stress hormones from saliva now. I can sort of map out your whole genome without a whole lot of expense. In fact, some really interesting research right now is suggesting that genetic characteristics of relationship partners make certain negative behaviors in our relationship more likely to stick. So if, again, think of that example of a couple with 5 negative behaviors, or if that sort of typifies their exchanges, that much negativity in their relationship, if that much negativity happens in a person who is genetically likely to over-respond to negativity, or someone who doesn't respond to negativity much at all, that same level of negativity may have dramatically different consequences for the quality of that relationship, right? So we can collect biological data, your genetics, for example, the gene that controls the likelihood of serotonin remaining in your synapses after they fire. We can measure the gene that controls that protein and make predictions about the effects that that's going to have in relation to the behaviors you exchange on your long-term satisfaction. Pretty amazing. So we can, as a result of these, link things like stress and relationships and our biology, and in the long term, even our physical health. So, here's a cool finding. This is reported by Darby Saxby, a graduate student, formerly a graduate student here at UCLA, but now a faculty member at USC. You know, it happens. And she worked here with my colleague Rena Rapetti, who is very well known. And we'll talk a lot about this kind of research and Professor Rapetti's research in particular when we talk about stress. But the cool finding is that a good relationship is like having a reset button for your biological levels of stress. So this is a study that involved people reporting through a self-report measure whether or not they were in more of a bad marriage or a good marriage. And you can ask people how satisfied they are in their relationship, and you can easily identify that people say, you know, things aren't going well. I'm not happy with the way this relationship is going. We're arguing a lot. We're struggling. My partner doesn't listen to me. There's not really the level of connection that we once had in the relationship. We can use self-report data to make a distinction between the relationships that are functioning well and the relationships that are not functioning well. At the same time, we can have people provide us with a saliva sample at repeated times during the day, and then we can look at the levels of cortisol in their saliva, right? And this is a variable that changes over time, and the idea is it's complicated because there are diurnal daily rhythms to our cortisol levels. But when we are under more stress, our body sort of engages in more of a fight or flight response, and cortisol is what mobilizes that response. It's one of the byproducts of our what's called our HPA axis, our hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and it really mobilizes us to have to act. And the idea is the more that we're constantly having to mobilize a fight or flight response, over time, it's going to take its toll on our health over long spans of time, okay? So the idea is that we can measure your afternoon cortisol, which is, in this study, was right at the end of a workday. So right before you go home for work, we would instruct you to not only tell us about your mood and how much stress you were under, but we want you to spit into this little cup. And give that to us, and we will eventually analyze it. And then later, before you go to bed, I'm also going to have you do that again. Okay, got it? So I know if your marriage is good or bad, and I've asked you at the end of your workday to, in effect, give me a sample of your saliva that will tell me about your HPA axis functioning and how much you're mobilized to be responding to the stresses that you're dealing with. And then I can ask you the same thing several hours later. Okay? So here is the person who, right there. Is that coming on? Right there. There is a person experiencing high stress at the end of their workday, right? If that person is in a good marriage, high stress day, good marriage, guess what? Their evening cortisol is relatively low, okay? Relative to the sample. If this person, same level of stress, really rough day, but they're in a bad marriage, their evening cortisol is much higher, right? So being in a good relationship, only through this kind of study, only through assessing physiology and hormones and things like that, could we really understand that this might be a mechanism, that there's something very powerful about our relationships that allow us to really make a transition out of the workplace. And so you're not met with a partner who says, you know, all these bills just can't, you know, you come home and you're stressed, and what does your partner do? They start nagging you in a bad relationship. They start telling you that you had a bad day today. Well, let me tell you about how bad my day was, right? Or you had a bad day today. Well, guess what? It's probably your fault because you're sort of insensitive sometimes. And I know you get mixed up with your boss. You do it all the time. It's your fault, right? That's the red line, okay? The blue line is, tell me about that. Yeah, I had a crappy day too, but I want to hear about your day. Tell me about your day. We'll deal with this. Guess what? I just got a great bottle of wine. Let's uncork that. Sit down, have some wine. Let's talk about this because it matters, right? That's the blue line. So there's something happening, probably, in those better relationships that allows you to take all of that accumulated stress, all of the negative emotion that's been churning through you during the course of your day, that then allows you to just sort of wipe the slate clean. Good relationships allow us to get back to a good biological baseline. And as a result, the idea is, this is one of many studies that are contributing to this line of thinking, as a result, the idea is my body is taking fewer hits every day. And as a result, I'm able to get back on track. I'm healthier. I have a better perspective when I go to work the next day. Yeah.
Okay, so going back to those graphs of what happened after the families had children.
Yeah.
How would children play into this? So if someone started off in a good relationship and they love their spouse and all of that, but then they have children and they're now the burden of children and financial burden is adding onto it, how would that play?
Well, in this particular case, everybody had kids. And 2 kids. One of whom had to be between the ages of 8 and 11. So in this particular, so I can talk about it in this particular case, and I'll talk about it more generally. In this case, to make matters even worse, both people had jobs that took them out of the house 35 hours or more per week. So this is the dual learner couple that has children. In fact, the whole study was about dual learner couples. But the issue would be you don't have to be in the workforce to be really stressed out at the end of the day, right? You can, if this was a person who had a small part-time job, one person taking care of the kids, and was in the home, it's the same amount. It could equally be stressful, right? So some of the stress could well be generated by children within any given dyad. We also have a strong hunch that the arrival of children sort of puts a fire under every relationship, right? So now, think about what, put something in a pot, put a fire under it, and you've got stuff moving around in that pot a lot, right? And so in general, we would think that this effect would be weaker without kids, stronger with kids. So the more stress there is in a system, the more that these sorts of differences are going to be exaggerated and identified. Is that the kind of thing you meant? Yeah. So you're going to get more churning up. And ideally, and you just got more stuff to do. You just have more stuff to do. I was cleaning out my office last night. It's a true story. As amazing as it would be to believe that I would actually clean out my office, I actually was doing that. And I ran across a card from my wife from 1991. And she said, even though things are really stressful right now, this is a good time of our lives. And that was the sweetest card to get, and so sweet for me to read last night. And the idea was, I know we're dealing with a lot of crap. I know our first child just arrived, but things are going to be okay, right? So there's the recognition that, yeah, this is stressful. And it's not to say that we didn't have a lot of arguments about who was going to take care of the kids during that time, because we did. We totally did. I've been married 26 years, I'm happy to say. And so the idea is they add a lot of fuel to the pot. They really do, unmistakably. And we also know that the effects of kids tend to be strongest when they're really young, when they really demand a lot from one or both parents. The interesting part is, and what I love to think about in relationships, is that they simultaneously increase the number of opportunities we have to provide support to our spouse, while also often sort of putting us in a position of feeling like we're the ones who need the support, right? So they have this really interesting dynamic, and the challenge for all of us, either if we're dealing with a dual income situation or children on the scene or a sick parent or, you know, two jobs that we're juggling, is how do you get outside your own stress and say, we'll talk about me in a minute. How are things going for you? So, you know, stress always sort of adds to the pot. We'll talk a lot about this when we get to chapter 11, about contextual influences on relationships. We'll also talk about really interesting combinations of stress in relation, different kinds of stress and how they magnify one another. Okay, one last slide. Let me take you through it. So what are we trying to do here? How does this connect us to where we're going to be on Tuesday? With the thoughtful use of various tools, we can provide ourselves with an understanding of intimacy. We can really try to get past all of those barriers that make it hard to understand relationships and get to portraits of relationships that are rich and rigorous and relevant. But we have to pull all of those pieces together. We have to decide how we're going to take all of these little bits of information and make sense of them in some more holistic way. And to do that, we're going to think very seriously about different theoretical perspectives. That's chapter 3, and we'll hit that on Tuesday. Thanks for your attention.